begin our consideration of the fourth beast of Daniel chapter 7. We've already gone through the first three: the lion with the plucked wings, the bear, and then the leopard. So the reading for this section is going to come from Daniel chapter 7. I'm going to read verses 7 and 8 and then 19 through 25. So Daniel 7, beginning of verse 7. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Now dropping down to verse 19. Then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron, and his nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. And one of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes, and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints, and prevailed against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High. And the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down, and break it in pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are the 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall arise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until the time and times and the dividing of time. Okay. So there are several aspects of this prophecy that we are going to look at this morning, or we're going to begin looking at. One is that this is an unnatural beast. All right, so the first 3, we have a general understanding of what a lion, a bear, and a leopard are. We also have a general understanding of their characteristics. And so with that understanding of their characteristics, we're able to discover how they relate to the 3 previous empires of the kingdom of men. And we went into that in some detail. But this beast is unnatural. Obviously, the picture that was up there is just an artist's rendition of what maybe it might have looked like. We really don't know. The next thing we're going to look at, it is referred to as being dreadful and terrible, which we might think is the same thing, but it is those 2 words mean slightly different things. We're going to look and see that it has iron teeth. Now, when we equate the beasts of Daniel chapter 7 to the image of Daniel chapter 2, this makes sense, that there must be some element of iron in the beast that relates to the iron of the image in Daniel chapter 2. And here we have the teeth. But we do find, in addition to iron teeth, it has nails of brass. And it's significant that in that these 2 elements of this beast, the iron and the brass, actually are reference to two different time periods of the beast's existence. And we'll look at that. So obviously the brass, we would normally equate that to Greece, wouldn't we? Okay. So there is some Greek element that in some time period of this fourth beast's existence, there will be a Greek element that will stamp the residue. That's as far as I'm going to go in that, because I'll give the whole thing away, and we won't need to have any more classes. Yeah, okay. All right. We're going to look at the 10 horns, what they represent. We are told in verse 20 that there are 10 horns on the head of the beast, right? And in verse 24, the 10 horns represent 10 kings. Those 10 horns are then followed up by an 11th horn, which is the notable horn. And this horn has eyes and a mouth. It is more stout than its fellows. It speaks great words against the Most High. It thinks to change times and laws, and it wears out the saints of the Most High, as we noted in verse, where is it? I'm not sure of the verse, but it declared that it will make war with the saints of the Most High. I thought it was in verse 8, but I don't see it there. 25. Speak great things. Yeah, okay, it's in verse 21. The same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them. So there's an element of the fourth beast during its extensive time period where war is made against the saints of God, and where that which the 11th horn represents for a time has the upper hand. Okay. And we'll look at the 3 horns also, the fact that the 11th horn replaced 3 horns. All right. Now, in regard to the fact that this is an unnatural beast, this is what Brother Mansfield writes. He says, the fourth beast is unnamed. In other words, it's not a lion, it's not a bear, it's not a leopard, it's just a beast. There is nothing in all the menagerie of fierce, powerful, and untamed animals of the jungle that can match this beast for its formidable and frightening appearance, its insatiable and ravenous greed, its brutal cruelty. Now, there's one thing that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about the fourth beast. And equating the fourth beast with the fourth element of the image in Daniel chapter 2, we would assume, well, this must be the Roman Empire. But the Roman Empire was only one aspect of this fourth beast. We learn from Daniel's prophecy that this fourth beast is not destroyed until he is destroyed by Christ and the saints. So what we learn from that simply is that the fourth beast still exists. It's still in power. Okay? The Roman Empire has ended, but the fourth beast remains. So the fourth beast, and that has a lot to do with its unnatural characteristic, okay? Because the swiftness of the leopard we looked at with the 11 years that it took Alexander the Great to conquer the then known world. The bear, we talked about the bear and its fighting methods. And then we talk about the lion, the change of perspective from the Assyrian to the Babylonian, the Assyrians were much about conquering nations and peoples and languages. The Babylonians simply wanted to make you into a Babylonian. So the wings, which indicate movement, have been plucked off of that line. So we can look at each of the empires, and we can consider them, certain aspects of them from profane history, and we can see how they equate to the details of the vision that is given in Daniel chapter 7. But this one, it is unnatural. There's nothing that you can, in nature, that you can compare it to. And that's because, again, because its influence and its cruelty and its brutality extends beyond just the Roman Empire. Okay? All right. Now, put a marker in Daniel chapter 7 and turn over to Revelation 13, because Revelation 13 presents to us a different picture of the same beast. So Revelation 13, let's see what my... Revelation 13, reading verses 1 through 7. And I want you to note the similarities between the beast of the sea and the unnamed beast. Revelation 13, beginning at verse 1. And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And there was given unto him a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies. And power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints, and to overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds, tongues, and nations. So there are several aspects of this beast in Revelation 13 that tie him to the beast of Daniel chapter 7. There are notable differences, but even in those differences, we can find a connection to Daniel chapter 7. So the first thing that we notice is that this beast rises up out of the sea. And that's the first thing we saw in Daniel chapter 7 when we first started considering this beast vision, is that the beasts rose up out of the sea, which in reference to Daniel chapter 7 is the Sea of Nations. And it is the Sea of Nations in Revelation 13 as well, but it's specific nations. And we'll look at that in a little bit. And this distinguishes this beast from the next beast that we see in verse 11, because that beast comes up out of the earth. So in chapter 13, we see the beast of the sea and the beast of the earth. And they are very different beasts. They are described with very different details. But they are two representations of a continuous system. Okay, there is the beast that rises up out of the sea, which is the Mediterranean Sea, meaning it rises up out of the nations surrounding the Mediterranean. The beast of the earth which we're not going to consider at all. But that is the Holy Roman Empire, which when you look at if you consider the empire, the first Roman Empire, it completely surrounded the Mediterranean Sea. When you look at the Holy Roman Empire, that empire stretched from Italy in the south to Austria, Germany, Prussia in the north. Okay, so you had the northern emperor, and you had the papacy in the south. And so the Holy Roman Empire essentially stretched from north to south in the midst of the European continent. Hence, it is the beast of the earth, whereas the other was the beast of the sea, the Mediterranean. But they both represent a continuing power, a power that was initiated in the Roman Empire, which we'll look at in some detail. We'll talk about Constantine and the rise of the Catholic Church within the Roman Empire, and the part that the papacy plays. Well, that was continued in the Holy Roman Empire, with a confederacy of the emperor in the north and the pope in the south. And if you're familiar with the history, the Holy Roman Empire began in the year 800 on Christmas Day, when the emperor was crowned by the pope. And every subsequent emperor of the Holy Roman Empire was crowned by the pope, until this short fellow came along. He kept his hand in his and here, right? Napoleon, which essentially that was the end of the Holy Roman Empire. The Napoleonic Wars, the French Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars ended the Holy Roman Empire. And Napoleon wanted to be crowned as the emperor, but he played a little trick. He had the Pope come up, and when the Pope was just about to crown him, he grabbed the crown out of the Pope's hand and put it on his own head and said, "I don't need you." And that was the end of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, we're all familiar with another name for the Nazi aggression in World War II. It's called the Third Reich. Okay? That means the Third Kingdom. And there was a behind-the-scenes confederacy between the Germanic emperor, if you will, and the church in the south. The idea was to restore the Roman Empire, the Third Reich, the Third Kingdom. Okay, enough of that. We want to go back to the comparison of the beast of the sea and the unnamed or unnatural beast of Daniel chapter 7. Okay, so the first thing we notice is that he rises out of the sea. Okay. The next thing we notice is that, like the beast of Daniel chapter 7, this one also has 10 horns. So there is a comparison there. Now, one thing that you might find very interesting is that the leopard, the bear, and the lion of Daniel chapter 7 are all represented in this single beast. Because the beast, we are told in verse 2, was like a leopard, but he had the feet of a bear and the mouth of a lion. So this representation of the beast system incorporates all three of the previous beasts of Daniel chapter 7. And the understanding of this is made evident by the rule concerning the kingdom of men, which is very easily seen in Daniel chapter 2. Because in Daniel chapter 2, that kingdom of men passed from one empire to another. And essentially, when it passed from the Babylonian to the Persian took all of the territory of the Babylonian and added more. Okay? And then when Alexander came, when the Greeks came, the Greeks essentially swallowed up the Persian Empire. Okay? The Romans is different in that it has not finished its conquest. Okay? Some of the territory that belonged to Alexander, the Romans took, but not all. And that's the difference between the iron teeth and the claws of brass. And we'll get to that. We'll look at that difference. So it was necessary, when we understand the image of Daniel chapter 2, it's necessary that all of the elements be combined together. Right? We know that from verse 35. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. So all of these successive empires, beginning with Babylon, all the way down through modern times with the feet of iron and clay, all are representatively overthrown by the stone, which becomes a great mountain to fill the whole earth. Well, that same rule needs to be applied to the beasts of Daniel chapter 7. And Revelation 13 shows us that this is the case. These beasts are the same beast, different visions of them, but it is describing the same empire, if you will, or the same power and dynasty. So this is how Brother Thomas relates the idea in Eureka. He says, in Daniel's 4 beasts, each succeeding beast absorbed the dominion of its predecessor. I've already gone through that. So that the bear may be said to have devoured the lion, and the leopard to have swallowed the bear, and the 10-horned 4th beast to have eaten up the leopard, so that in the 4th beast would be contained the lion, the bear, and the leopard, in addition to appendages peculiar to itself. And those appendages that Brother Thomas is talking about are those horns. This is shown by John in his sea monster, or beast of the sea, who shows the leopard he gorged in his body, and the bear he had devoured in his feet. Oh, yes. That's all as far as I went with that quote. But I wanted to point out it's highly significant that in Revelation 13, now in Daniel chapter 7, we see that it is a horn that has eyes in the mouth, and the mouth speaks blasphemies, right, and declares war against the saints. But in the vision in Revelation 13, it is the mouth of the beast, of the lion. So, again, what does the lion represent? It's very quiet. Babylon. It is not without significance that the beast of Revelation 13 speaks with the mouth of Babylon. And this beast in Revelation 13 speaks great blasphemies against God with that mouth. And as we understand Roman Catholicism, with its blasphemous claims to be a religion that is based in Babylonian mysticism, the point should not be lost on us. The Roman beast, as revealed by John, speaks with the mouth of Babylon, represented by the lion. So in regard to each beast successively devouring the preceding beast, as explained by Brother Thomas, it should be noted that certain aspects of this, again, await future fulfillment, specifically in regard to the feet of the bear. We'll get to that with his claws. All right. And just as a precursor to that, I've been hinting at it, but there is an element of the Bear Empire that the Roman Empire never acquired. If you remember, it was, now Alexander did not extend the Persian Empire by much. The Persian Empire, and that's why the feet are the feet of the bear, because there is still an element of the Bear Empire that the Roman Empire needs to conquer. And that is everything essentially west of the Euphrates. Okay? Now, you can picture in your mind the empire of the Persians and the Greeks extended all the way into India. The Roman Empire never extended all the way into India. So that portion of the beast kingdom, if you will, still awaits to be conquered. And it is the bare feet, B-E-A-R, feet, that will stamp the residue with what kind of claws? Claws of brass. And that relates, the idea is it relates us to the Greek Orthodox. And when we look at, if we consider the Greek Orthodox as being the claws of the bear to stamp the residue meaning that additional area which the Roman never conquered, it's important that the whole of the kingdom of man be represented. And if that has yet to be conquered, and apparently will be by the Greek Orthodox, what nation is being brought into the picture? Russia. Exactly. So, and we understand that it will be a confederacy between the autocrat, if you will, Tsar of Russia, and the Pope. We understand that. And so the picture that Brother Thomas presents, which we will get to eventually, is that this area yet to be conquered will be part of the end days working out of the prophecy. That as the Roman Church has persecuted and with great cruelty conquered, if you will, the hearts and minds of millions, so will the Greek Orthodox, because they are one and the same. If you remember when in Daniel chapter 4, that great tree of Babylon, which was Nebuchadnezzar, right, and his kingdom, under which all the animals gathered together. What happened to that tree? It was cut down, and then there was something placed on the stump. There was a band of brass and a band of iron. The Babylonian stump continues through the Roman and through the Greek churches. And they will actually have a military and political part to play in the future. So that's a little hint as why this beast has nails of brass, the beast of Daniel chapter 7. Okay, so we also notice that the beast, like the one in Daniel 7, the beast in Revelation 13 has a mouth speaking great things. And again, it is a Babylonian mouth, notably. But in Daniel chapter 7, it is a horn that has the mouth and the eyes. And again, we'll look at this in much more detail. But obviously horns are used in Scripture as powers or as authority. And the power and the authority of the Roman system past the life of the Roman Empire, if you will, that power was exercised through the words that this little horn would speak. In its bulls and edicts, okay, its blasphemies against the saints of the Most High. When you look at, when you compare Daniel with Revelation, we've said this before, it's important to understand that Daniel is showing to us the political aspect of the conflict between the kingdom of men and the kingdom of God. Revelation is showing us the development of the religious system that is in conflict with the kingdom of God. And so it is the religious system that exerts its power against the saints of the Most High. We are not involved politically in this world, but we stand out. Our brethren, since the times of Constantine, stand out from the accepted universal church and its teachings. And that marks any ideology, any religious doctrines, any teachings that stand out from the universal church, mark them as heretics and fair game. And that is really the brutal nature of this beast. We just need to keep that in mind. All right. We have lots of time. Back in Daniel chapter 7. Let's see, what else did I have? Mouth speaking great things. Okay. So that picture there is the beast of the sea. You can see the Mediterranean. And then what I tried to do is I tried to color in the nations around the Mediterranean that were different parts of the Roman Empire. And what that map does is it breaks it down neatly for us, because in a bit we're going to talk about how the Roman Empire came to be through a successive number of wars. And what I did there is, like, Spain is pink, which is separate from the purple of Gaul, because it was a different war. I tried to break it down into the different wars. And Italy is green, Greece is red, and so on and so forth. And North Africa is all yellow. Okay. So we'll just keep that up there until we get to the various wars that brought about the Roman Empire. But first I want to look at, in Daniel chapter 7, the fact that this beast is called dreadful and terrible. Now, both of these words we would expect them to be Hebrew in the original, but they are not. The first 8 chapters of Daniel are written in Aramaic. So these words are actually of Aramaic origin. And it's difficult to then take these words and define them by context, because you're not going to find them anywhere else in Scripture, because they're not Hebrew and they're not Greek. They are Aramaic. So what is Aramaic? Well, Aramaic is a language that was thought to have first appeared among the Armenians around the 11th century BC. Okay, now we typically associate Aramaic with the times of Christ, right? The Bible was written in Greek, or the oldest manuscripts that we have are written in Greek, but they spoke Aramaic, right? And of course, Jesus, when he would speak in Hebrew, would confuse the people, because they weren't speaking pure Hebrew. They were speaking Aramaic. But you may be surprised to learn that Aramaic is much older than the times of Christ, the 11th century BC. So by the 8th century BC, it had become accepted by the Assyrians as their second language. Much as many people in this country, English is a second language, right? But, okay, we won't go there. I didn't get the response that I had hoped for out of that. No. So we'll move on. So the mass deportations of people by the Assyrians, they would have been speaking, it mixed this Aramaic language into many, many different cultures. The Babylonian merchants used Aramaic. So as they traveled about, it was a language, it was kind of like English is sort of, in that many different countries, people from those countries understood the Aramaic. So again, the Babylonians tended to spread it through their trading. And so in the 7th and 6th centuries BC, it supplanted Akkadian as the common language of the Middle East. See, Hebrew was not the common language of the Middle East. We should be aware of that, right? The descendants of Abraham spoke Hebrew. Everybody else spoke this Akkadian language. Well, by the 7th and 6th century BC, the Akkadian was being supplanted as the common tongue by Aramaic. It became the official language of the Persian dynasty. And through the conquests of Alexander the Great, the Greek language began to replace the Aramaic as a more formal language. Aramaic was still spoken, but Greek took over in certain areas of people's lives, like the Greek language. So the fact that the early chapters of Daniel are written in Aramaic is cause for some people to doubt the timing of Daniel's prophecy. They say it must be a much older prophecy, because in their minds they equate Aramaic with the times of Christ. And of course, Daniel was written how many years before the time of Christ? Well, let's just say centuries, right? Because we're familiar with the prophecy of Daniel chapter 9, and from the rebuilding of the wall in Jerusalem to the time of the Messiah was that 69 weeks, okay? So, and we know it wasn't 69 weeks, we know it was 487 years, and Daniel, of course, was still in Babylon at this time, so that decree to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem hadn't happened by the time Daniel was actually writing or when the first 8 chapters of Daniel were being written down. Okay, so again, there are those who feel that Daniel was written much later, which would have obviously made some of his prophecies history instead of prophecy. And it's a reason why some people doubt the truth of the Bible. But this idea that Aramaic was a later tongue is soundly refuted by linguistic scholars. I found this gentleman, his name is Claude Condor. I didn't find him specifically. I found record of him because he lived in 1848 to 1910. And he was an explorer, and he was into antiquated cultures, let's just put it that way. And he was considered to be an expert in Arabic and Middle Eastern cultures. And this is what he wrote concerning the subject of Aramaic. Tracing the occurrences of the Aramaic language, which was akin to Hebrew, yet distinct as a dialect, Colonel Condor dissents from the conclusion that its presence indicates a late date for the writings containing it. He points to the distinction between Laban's and Jacob's speech. What's he talking about there? Remember when Jacob went back to Uncle Laban? They spoke different languages. Okay. and a very early date, the presence of Aramaic words on the Moabite stone. Okay, you may be familiar with the Moabite stone. Other inscriptions. And then he adds, we have no reason then to suppose that these indications betoken late date in the Bible, any more than the inscription of King Mesha at Dibon, known as the Moabite stone. The whole linguistic evidence favors the antiquity of the literature which was penned before the captivity, and there is no evidence of late date to be drawn from language of these books. So according to expert, the Aramaic language was much older than is commonly thought by those critics of the Bible. Okay, so that's interesting. It's written in Aramaic. Why? I mean, that's really not our topic, but I just wanted to point out that the normal contextual cross-referencing method of understanding words in their original meaning does not apply here because they aren't written in Hebrew or Greek. So what is dreadful? Well, dreadful is translated as afraid in chapter 4, verse 5. I saw a dream which made me afraid. It's also translated as feared in 5, verse 19. For the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, languages trembled and feared before him. That was Nebuchadnezzar. It's translated fear in chapter 6. So the dreadful is something that causes fear. That's the basic idea. Something that causes one to be afraid. Now the word terrible, that's ematan, E-M-E-T-A-N. It comes from the same root as emma, which means fear, horror. And that's talking about the actual emotion. So the words are being brought together to convey the idea of something that is meant to cause fear and the fear that it actually causes. So what's that telling us? Is that this thing was fearful. It was scary looking. And I was afraid. Its look was effective. It caused fear in the hearts of men. It was fearful to see, and it caused fear in the hearts of men. And when Brother Mansfield says this, its fearsome appearance is calculated to cause fear in those who are threatened by it. And I think that's pretty accurate. When we think about the actions of the Roman throughout history, the brutality, the cruelty that was exhibited on those who the Romans saw as its enemy, it's quite fearful. And our brothers and others who were claimed as heretics feared for their lives. Literally. It's much, much different than what we experience today. So the power of the Roman Empire shifted from political when the empire essentially disappeared into the west, if you will, in 476. Rome was defeated. In 1453, Constantinople was defeated by the Turks. So what happened at that point was the power shifted to the religious authority in Rome, because that authority lived on. Now, if you remember, it was Constantine who moved the political power to Constantinople, right? He named it for himself. But he left the church in charge in Rome. And the political power of Rome was extinguished in 476. The political power of the Roman Empire in the East was extinguished in 1453. But the power, a power in Rome remained. And it's interesting, is it not, that the beast of the sea receives its power from the dragon. And the dragon represents pagan Rome. Because the dragon is a serpent with power. So that pure carnal thinking, which was at the seat of Rome's pagan religion, it gave its power to the Roman Catholic system. So when Constantine in 316 took a vote and chose what has become the Catholic. Now, what does Catholic mean? Universal, right. It is the universal church. It wasn't called the Catholic Church at that point. It became the universal church. It became the Catholic Church. But when Constantine in 316 chose that particular sect, if you will, of Christianity, it put all other sects in danger, because that which Constantine chose now had the power of the Roman Empire behind it. And even when the Roman Empire lost its political power, this beast, if you will, of the sea retained its authority. And it exercised that authority in some very horrible ways. So I have some comments that refer directly to the fear that is caused by this particular authority, which remained after the demise of the Roman Empire, and as it has bearing on the kingdom of God and the kingdom of men, that conflict, because that conflict, we know, continues far beyond the Iron Empire of Rome. So Edward Gibbon, writing about the position of the Roman Empire in favor of that chosen church, this is what he says: the design to totally remove the name, or at least of the restraining of progress of these odious heretics, was prosecuted with vigor and effect. Some of the penal regulations were copied from the edicts of Diocletian. Now, who was Diocletian? He was a Roman emperor who was brutal in persecution against the Christians. So this Christian power, Christian, if I can use my air quotes, power has adopted the methods of the emperor who persecuted them. And this method of conversion was applauded by the same bishops who felt the hand of oppression and had pleaded for the rights of humanity. Again, Diocletian, 244 to 311. He ordered the great persecution against Christians who refused to yield to and sacrifice to the Roman gods. So he wasn't picking on he was essentially all Christians, because they refused to worship the Roman gods, and he was right before Constantine. Leading members of the clergy were arrested and ordered to sacrifice or die, and a bishop in Nicomedia who refused was beheaded. Finally, any Christian who refused was tortured and killed. That's under Diocletian. So this is the attitude that the church adopted. Further laws against heresy appeared in 380 AD under the Christian emperor Theodosius I, who laid down this new rule: we command that those persons who follow this rule shall embrace the name of Catholic Christians. The rest, however, whom we adjudge demented and insane, shall sustain the infamy of heretical dogmas. Their meeting places shall not receive the name of churches. They shall be smitten first by divine vengeance, and secondly by the retribution of our own initiative, which we shall assume in accordance with divine judgment. So this is 380 AD. This is before the Roman Empire comes to an end. But it shows that the spirit of the power of Rome was behind the church. St. Augustine, 354 to 430, taught that error has no rights. He cited biblical texts, notably Luke 14, verses 16 to 23, to justify the use of compulsion. Had not Christ himself blinded St. Paul in order to make him see the true light? According to Augustine, coercion using great violence was justified. He made a distinction between unbelievers who persecuted because of cruelty as against Christians who persecuted because of love. It's crazy. I'm going to take 5 more minutes. The Waldensians, followers of Peter Waldo of Lyon, were excommunicated as heretics in 1184. So this is after the fall of Western Rome, but before the fall of Eastern Rome. They were excommunicated as heretics at the Council of Verona and persecuted with zeal for centuries. Anyone in one city who declined to go to a Roman Catholic Mass was liable to be crucified upside down, but there was some variation in the matter of killing in other towns. Some were maimed and left to die of starvation. Some had strips of flesh cut off their bodies until they bled to death. Some were stoned. Some impaled alive upon stakes or hooks. Some were dragged along the ground until the flesh was scraped away. One, at least, was literally minced. Daniel Rambo had his toes and fingers cut off in sections, one joint being amputated each day in an attempt to make him recant and accept the Roman faith. Some had their mouths stuffed with gunpowder, which was then ignited. This is the method that the Roman beast has used against those who the beast sees as heretics. And what is it that defines a heretic? Those who do not accept the Roman faith. Where would we see ourselves? Exactly. We would be heretics. We would be subject to this treatment. In 1229, Pope Gregory IX declared that it is the duty of every Catholic to persecute heretics. He preached a crusade against the Stedingers, a Germanic people living near the river Weser, whose heresy amounted to no more than rejecting the temporal authority of Archbishop of Bremen. An army of 40,000 was raised under the bishops of Ratzenburg, Lübeck, Osnabrück, Munster, and Minden. So the bishops raised an army of 40,000. Of the 11,000 or so Stedingers able to bear arms, most were slaughtered on the field of battle. The rest were killed later, many of them being drowned in the Weser, along with women, children, and old men. The whole population was exterminated. This is the dreadful, terrible of this beast. All right, again, quickly. Translating the Bible into vernacular languages or helping with the printing of such a Bible was heresy according to the Roman Church. In the 16th century, William Tyndale translated the Bible into English. In danger of arrest and fear of his life, he fled the country. He was arrested in the Netherlands and in 1536 was executed for heresy for agreeing with the Lutheran doctrine of justification by faith. So now we're up into the 1500s. Anabaptists, the precursors of modern Baptists, were persecuted by Catholics, Lutherans, and Calvinists alike. The Anabaptists' main crimes were to call for social reform, to favor adult baptism over infant baptism, and to embrace pacifism. Their leaders died in various ways. Thomas Munzer was burned at the stake in 1525. Philes Mans drowned in 1526. Drowning was a favorite way of executing the Anabaptists because they believed in adult baptism. How cruel is that? Michael Sattler received the following judgment. He is committed to the executioner. The latter shall take him to the square and first cut out his tongue, then forge him fast to a wagon, and there with glowing iron tongues twice tear pieces from his body. Then on the way to the site of execution 5 more times, burn his body to powder. No, do as above, tearing pieces from his body, and then burn his body to powder as an arch heretic. A whole town, the town of Munster, went over to the Anabaptists in the 1530s. Catholics and Protestants joined forces to retake the city. The Anabaptist leaders were publicly tortured to death with red-hot pincers. Their bodies hung in cages outside a church where they remained for some years. So doesn't that sound more like, government against government, like one nation against another? Hey, we're gonna rise up. We're gonna raise an army to go back and go and take this city back. And there was no lack of cruelty to be exhibited against those who stood in opposition to the church. All right, next time, which I have no idea when that will be, we'll talk about the iron teeth and the brazen claws.